There's actually a category of, unorthodox psychiatry. And this was a situation where a woman came to our Solent 5-day workshop, and she had had a depression that had lasted, I think, 4 years. And every time she got up in the morning, she couldn't get going. It took her 2 hours before she really got to move. And she, in the breathwork that we were doing, had some powerful birth experiences, linked the depression to difficult birth. But then the final resolution came when she felt unresolved, and we put her in the middle and wanted to complete the experience when the rest of the group was assisting. And she finally ended up chanting in a very emphatic way, a repetitive chant, kind of a prayer. And it lasted for a very long time. People around, in the group, they felt very moved. Some people started to cry. Some people were going into a lotus position, and nobody knew what was happening. She was there, in an extremely sort of emotional state, chanting something that none of us understood. And then finally lay back, and it was just in ecstasy. And there was a psychoanalyst from Buenos Aires who came to us. He was Jewish, and came to us and says, "This is incredible. Do you understand what happened?" We said, "No." He said she was chanting in perfect Sephardic, which is a medieval, Spanish Hebrew kind of a mixture, like what you have between German and Hebrew. And it happened to be his hobby. Synchronistically, it happened to be his hobby. And so we said, "What was she singing?" And he said she was singing, "I am suffering, and I will always suffer. I am praying. I am crying, and I will always cry. I am praying, and I will always pray." And somehow, doing this kind of Sephardic prayer for a significant amount of time resolved her depression. We saw her several times later, and the depression didn't come back. So it's not easy to find a psychiatric handbook where they would be talking about healing depression by Sephardic prayers. I don't understand to this date what it was about, but there are things that happen, which are very extraordinary, very, very unusual mechanisms of healing, like the one that I call Flora, where the demonic archetype came through, or this one where it was about the Sephardic prayer.
I was curious about the connection between the woman who was chanting in Sephardic, ancient Sephardic words. Did she have knowledge of that language prior?
Absolutely no. She didn't know what the language was, and she didn't know ordinary Spanish or Hebrew.
And did anyone record it?
We didn't record this one. We recorded in some of the breathwork. Sometimes, people. One of the things that happened, people start talking spontaneously. Now, in some instances where we recorded it, they were talking in language that they didn't learn in this lifetime. In some instances, we would give it to linguists, but they were not able to identify it, which doesn't really say very much. When Christina and I visited Australia, we found out that the Australian Aborigines have about 200 languages. And then if you look how many languages there are in Africa and in India, or you take it back into history, how many languages there have already been. Even if the linguists don't understand it, you cannot exclude that it is an existing language, because in some instances you can do that. I have a story there about actually my sister-in-law in that book, where she and my brother emigrated to Canada, and they had to support themselves and prepare for medical examinations. And so she was kind of sleep deprived, and she started hearing voices. she's a psychiatrist, so that's really bad news when you start hearing voices. But then it seemed that it was like a language and sounded like something Middle Eastern, and so she took it to a Sufi teacher, and he recognized it, and it was ancient Arabic, and it was some Sufi texts which were not published, which were just passed through, oral transmission, and so he immediately sent her to Yugoslavia, to the higher level of the order, and then she ended up in Kona all the way, and it was they told her that they were expecting her. It was just an unbelievable story. So you can see, you can hear these, that exactly what is gibberish, what is a language, what is talking in tongues might not always be very clear, but there are instances where people really speak languages that they have never heard about, and you can show their languages. In other instances, it can go into movements. People can, not knowing anything about yoga, they can go into perfect asanas or do mudras, appropriate mudras, or we have seen when people started doing sounds which were exactly like the Kechak, the Balinese monkey chant, when a group of people represents the army the army of monkeys that was helping Rama, that led by Hanuman. And again, we had in Maryland, we had a closed circuit TV, so people who wanted their sessions recorded, we had the recording, and so when some strange movements would come, we then could try to find out, was this, when it looked very stylized, was this some kind of an art form from another culture? And in some instances, people would do dances from India and sort of hand movements that take years to learn, like they are telling stories of Krishna just in digital symbols of various kinds. And in some instances you can confirm that, or a person enacts a courtship dance of some other life form,